Hello, Atmore. It's the Lloyd and Friends show. And now here's your host, Lloyd Alderton.
I had to round this lady up. I had to hunt for her. She turned out she was living just right across the holler down here in Spanish Fort. She's a wonderful lady. She represents Atmore, and you're going to be delighted to hear me have a little conversation with Miss Lucy Cunningham. Miss Cunningham.
I can talk.
You can talk.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I didn't know whether to break in. I didn't know what he might do to me.
Well, if you get a word in edgewise, you have to break in with me. That's what my wife tells me.
Well, I do. I need to make a correction at the very beginning. I live in Daphne instead of Spanish Fort.
Daphne. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Well, I don't know the difference, but I guess I should.
Well, it all runs together. Daphne.
That old Spanish Fort used to be nothing there. When you go to Mobile, you go through that little spot called Spanish
Well, now
Fort.
everything from you go to Spanish Fort, you run into Daphne, and you don't know when you're in Daphne. Then you run into Fairhope, you don't know when you're in Fairhope. We've just all merged together almost.
It is. It's just a big popular area where everybody wants to live these days.
That's right.
Well, now, Miss Cunningham, let's start. I want to kind of build a little story here for you. Now, you grew up in Atmore. I've talked to you in years past, and you've told me some stories about going to school here in Atmore.
Right. Well, I was born in Monroe County, down almost on the Baldwin County line, and I went to school at the J.U. Blackshear in Uriah until I was in the 7th grade.
Okay.
And I moved to Atmore on January 1st, 1941, and my father died about 3 months after we moved here. And I was in the 7th grade, and that is a really bad time to move any child in the 7th grade. But I got used to it real fast and just enjoyed it and loved Atmore, and I still miss it. I still call it my home.
Well, January 1941, so that was the very same year that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. So this is on the brink of World War II.
I do have a little story I'd like to tell about that, about
Absolutely.
Finding out about the bombing of Pearl Harbor. We moved here, of course, as I said, in January. So in December, I was already in the band. I was playing clarinet, and there were 2 other people that played clarinet. But everybody always met on Sunday afternoons because in the band, because the mayor liked to have a little gathering every once in a while in front of the city hall, and the band would play, and then different people would talk about different things. Well, this particular day, on that day, December 7th, of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, we all usually met right at the corner of where the old school, the Patterson School, elementary, Rachel Patterson School.
Okay.
We met there and walked together down there, a group of us. Well, we were waiting that day on Johnny Crawford, one of our classmates, to get there and walk with us. Well, Johnny was always pulling tricks on us. He never, it was very hard to know when he was telling the truth or just pulling your leg. So he walks up and he said, "The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor." We said, "Oh, you're just making that up." Well, really, we were not too familiar where Pearl Harbor was, but we knew if the Japanese bombed it, it was terrible. So anyway, we fussed at him all the way down to the city hall, and he fussed back at us for not believing. We said, "You're absolutely not telling the truth. You're just doing like you always do, trying to get us to get mad with you or something." And of course, when we get to the city hall, we sit down in our seats, and the mayor gets up and said, I'm very sorry to announce that the Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor. And of course, Johnny stood up right then and started pointing his finger at us and said, "See, I told you so." But every time Pearl Harbor is mentioned, and at this particular time right now, it's been very hard for me to look at the television news about Romania because of the fact that the Ukraine area now, because of that, it looks too much like the beginning of World War II, you see. Those scenes. Of course, the only way we knew about World War II then was by radio or by going to the picture show on Saturday afternoons to see the newsreels.
The old Strand down here?
Oh, the old Strand, that's right, the old Strand.
Well, they've been repairing that.
Yes, I do.
Supposed to be up and running soon.
And I'm delighted about that because that was my first job, one of my first jobs.
How about that? What'd you do, take tickets?
I sold tickets and made popcorn.
Now, refresh my, I missed, what age were you at this point?
I was 12 years old at
You were
that
12.
time.
So
12.
you were old enough to understand what was going on.
Right. I knew what was going on, and we knew that it was bad because immediately everything changed. People began the boys that were dropping out of school, I mean, they were being taken out of school because of the draft, and then some were dropping out of school as soon as they could to join in the armed forces. And then so many people were moving into town from other places because they were working at the shipyard.
I see.
And so that was how, in fact, that's how my husband's family got to Atmore from Tennessee. His dad moved down to work in the shipyard. Mm-hmm. So, yes, practically all during my high school years, it was World War II.
A lot of women worked at the shipyard.
Oh, yes,
too,
they
didn't
did. They did. And we had, the radio was the only way that we really heard about anything, about the war and all, but we knew there was a lot going on, and there was just a burst of patriotism, and love of country and wanting to do what they could do. And so it was every Friday, just about every Friday night, maybe not every Friday night, but many, many Friday nights, a representative from the Red Cross would come, and we would meet at a building. I think maybe it was not at the present Legion Hall, but maybe it was a Legion Hall at that time. Mm-hmm. And the girls would roll bandages for the Red Cross. And then the boys, most of the time, sometimes Mr. Hodnick would let them out of class, and they would go downtown, walk the streets selling war bonds and all. But it was interesting times because everybody came together. Everybody, we were experiencing the same things. We had, now my brother was 12 years older than I, so he was already in the Merchant Marine, and of course the Merchant Marine was taken over by the government then, and he was overseas most of the time, you see. But anyway, it was a very interesting time, and there was a lot of love of country at that time. Mm-hmm.
And, I had a guest that I bet we talked a lot about World War II, Amy Bartel. Did you know Amy? She was a little younger than you.
Amy, oh yes.
Amy, yeah.
Yes, but I taught her sister Bonnie.
You taught Bonnie? Okay.
I taught Bonnie, right,
okay.
in the second grade.
Okay. Well, I invited Bonnie to come over, but she wasn't able to come because we talk about you all the time.
Right.
Yeah, she told me that.
Oh, yeah, we've
her.
remained really good friends.
Well, you got any secrets you can tell on her?
Pardon?
You have any secrets you can tell on her?
No, I don't, except she was in my second grade, and she was really we just, I don't know, seemed like we grew real close together. And, some children you could get closer to than others. But there is one, but I still love Bonnie, so I want her to know that I still love. Of course, I am a teacher that I think I loved all my children, and I still do, and I call them my children. But now there was one girl that I would like to tell something about here, and I hope she hears this sometimes. Her name was Laura Phillips. She was a distant, her mother was a distant cousin of mine. Well, Laura is Laura Thatcher now, and she was in my second grade class, and we'd already gotten to be really good friends, and I would take her to a lot of our little family reunions, of course, and she just thought it was so wonderful when she heard that she called me Lucy Lee, of course, was going to be her teacher. So her mother told her, said, Laura, you cannot call her Lucy Lee in class. You have to call her Mrs. Cunningham. And she says, well, I just won't call her then. And sure enough, Laura never spoke my name in class. But as soon as the school was out, she would linger a little while outside in the hall till everybody else had left. And she'd come back and say, bye, Lucy Lee. I hope she remembers that.
Well, you were probably very young yourself. How old were you when you started teaching?
Oh, I was 21.
21.
I was just out of college. I graduated in May of, what year would that have been? 1950. And I went to work in the fall of 1950.
Where'd you go to school? Troy?
I went to what was called Alabama, called Montevallo at that time,
okay.
And then it was became Alabama College, you see.
Okay.
And of course, it was an all-girls school, and so we didn't even have your father even could not take your luggage upstairs. You had to lug everything upstairs by yourself. They were not allowed in the dormitories, and that was really an interesting time in college because no cars on campus, of course, and no men on campus except that for dates they could come. Mm-hmm. But if you had a date and you were sitting out on the bench outside on the campus, the watchman came by about every 10 minutes shining his flashlight on everybody.
You had to go out in front to meet him.
Right. So we had by the time I graduated, we did have, by the time I was went into college, though, of course, the World War II had ended, and we had all the men coming back, and, of course, the GI Bill had been introduced, and so they got to come to the colleges, and most of them wanted to go to the co-ed colleges, but then when the co-ed colleges were, when all the co-ed colleges were completely full, they had no more room for them, they let them come to, like Montevallo, to an all-girls school, but they had to leave the campus at the end of the day. They couldn't, mm-hmm. They could not board there. They had to leave. Mm-hmm. And so those were interesting times that when I graduated, or when I went to college, because you didn't have, you couldn't bring your. The last year I was at school, they allowed the girls to have cars. And one of our senior class, of course, she got a car for graduation, and that was the most exciting day in the world when she could drive her car on the campus. Of course, it got a little bit at the end of my freshman year. We had a new president, and he was retired from the Marines. He had set up for the government on one of the islands in the Pacific. So he was home. And he was a former teacher, so he became the president. And he was a younger, and he knew that people had that level.
You're talking about the president of the college.
Right.
Okay.
Of the college, that's right. And so he made it a little easier for them. He relaxed some of those rules we had, you see. And so that was all. But that was at the end of, a lot of that was the end of my college life, But anyway, it was, we enjoyed having a little bit more freedom,
Well, now going back just a little bit, you were 12 years old when you came to Atmore.
Mm-hmm.
And you went to the high school.
I went into the high school.
And that was at that time over here where the...
Right. It was
the middle
on...
school. Later became the middle school.
Presley School.
Presley Street, yes.
Middle school, right. Of course, it's closed now, Right.
So that's where you went to...
That's where I went to school.
High school. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Now, when did you decide that you would be a teacher? When did you...
My story of that is really... I've told this many times, and people say, well, most people don't know. From the time I was little, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. My mother we lived in Swift's camp. My daddy was manager of the store and was the bookkeeper. And we were in the log camp there. And we all lived in company houses. And so one day, my mother found me out in the writing on the wall on the house with chalk. And she said, you can't write on this. Is not our house. You can't do that. So, but she went out. So I went out into the chicken house where she had all their chickens. And she said, I could write on that wall. And so she would come out there, and I was like probably 4 years old, and she would find me trying to teach the chickens. I would write on the board, and of course I didn't know how to add anything, but I was teaching chickens. And from that day forward, so as far as I know, I wanted to be a teacher all my life.
How about that? I have a granddaughter that used to come when she was over here. She would gather me up to sit, and she would get the board and teach me. And she would just emulate the whole role. And I sit down there, there. You listen up. But as you tell that, I think about that. Teachers are oftentimes the most prominent role model outside mom and dad in the home that kids get to see. And it's no wonder that they would be impressed to be.
Well, that's one of the things that I have hoped that I did when I was teaching. Of course, I know some of them, if they hear my name, they think, "Oh my word, not that woman," But to me, I have hope. I really do, that I led some child in the way that they needed to go, or maybe help them in some way. Mm-hmm. And I always felt like that I wanted a child to feel secure in my room, and I wanted them to know that they were just as good as any other child in that room. And when, of course, I first started teaching at Bratt, and back then, people didn't have as much as they have now. And so I always I wanted to make every child feel special and what they have, and to bring out the best in them, because maybe some of them didn't think they could do as well as others, you see. But
as a teacher back in those days, you had more autonomy than teachers have today, didn't you? I mean, your classroom was your domain, and now there's a lot of bureaucratic rules about what you have to do.
Well, then, most of the time, we were in charge of our classroom. You brought what you had been trained to do. You brought it right into your classroom. And you were, of course, the rules. But then the first thing you did when you got there, you had the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and you had your Bible reading, and you had your prayer. And that started every day. And of course, when that disappeared, when they began to say you could not do this and you could not do that, and the government stepped in like that, I think things began to change. It began because when my first few years of teaching, it was just you had control of your classroom. You had control of it. You had a principal who was usually there. If you couldn't handle the problems, he would,
Mm-hmm. Now, they paddled you back in those days, didn't they?
Right. Oh, yes.
Did you ever swing the paddle, or did you?
I think I did once or twice, but usually I would do something. I don't remember doing it a lot, but I bet there's some kid who hears this sometime, he'll say, well, I remember she did.
Did you ever stand a student with putting their nose in the ring?
No, I didn't make them do that, I don't think. I think my biggest punishment was the writing. I will not do that again. Or make them stay in at recess, when I had some.
That was a practice that continued. I'll never forget. I was in high school. Miss McKay, Miss Nellie McKay. You knew Nellie, didn't you?
Right, I did.
And she caught me and a buddy of mine, Frankie Lewis. I don't know if you never knew Frankie Lewis.
Right.
Frankie was a year or two ahead of me in school, but she made us write sentences, 500. I will not talk in class. So I just worked on mine, and I must have had 400. And Frankie, he came in, he didn't write any of his. So Miss McKay said, well, you boys are just going to have to go to the office for your paddling. I said, wait a minute, I got most of mine. And she said, well, we'll adjust the paddling. So we got up there, and she took me in first, because Frankie, he said she wasn't going to paddle him. He wasn't going to take a paddling. So she held him back. And so I got 7 of the hardest licks I have ever gotten from anybody. Sweet Miss Nellie McKay. Now, she was a sweet lady. Boy, she blistered me. And when Frankie got back, I said, how many licks did you get? He said, oh, she didn't whip me. I wouldn't let her whip me. She didn't whip me. So this went on, and I kind of resented that. So Mr. Wayne McKay, he used to help coach in the football. So he used to take us boys home from football practice, and I said, Mr. McKay, that just ain't right the way Miss McKay did me. He said, what'd she do? I told him. He said, that don't sound like my wife. She's fat. I don't sound like her. So he came back later, and he said, oh, Britton, he said, I talked to my wife. She said she gave that boy 14 licks. Oh. and I ran into Frankie, never would confess to that. I saw him at a funeral about 2 or 3 years ago, and here comes Frankie Lewis walking in. And I said, Frankie, I want to ask you this question. I've wondered about it my whole life. Now, you tell me the truth now. Did Miss McKay whip you that day? He said, yes, she wore me out. But he lied all those years out of it.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't really get to know you until you taught my children down at, I'm not sure if you taught them at Brad and Walnut Hill, because they went to Brad and Walnut.
I can't remember. Okay. I cannot remember which. Okay. And I always got, and now I get, like when you say Albritton, I get them all mixed up, you see, because I think, okay, this family and that family. And of course, we always had the roll, the first of the year when you made out your roll, you always had an Amerson.
Yeah.
Always had an Amerson. Yeah. Amerson. And so, anyway, one year, I did not have my roll completely made. And so I thought, and then I looked at it and I said, there's something wrong with this roll. And they said, And they asked me, I've forgotten, I think they asked me, maybe the secretary came down and asked me if I had my roll book that she needed, to copy some things. And I said, no. I said, I've just, my roll book doesn't look right. And so
I didn't have an Amerson on it.
She said, what's wrong with it? I said, well, there's no Amerson. And she started laughing. But later on, the Amerson did arrive. So I never had a roll book that did not have an Amerson on it. So
That's funny.
But anyway, I can remember that. And I said, there's something wrong with this roll.
Well, there were a lot of Amersons, a lot of Godwins.
Godwins.
I know you probably always
yes.
had a Godwin.
We remember Mr. Bob.
Bob Godwin drove the school bus. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And he was our custodian at Bratch, you see, also.
Oh, I see. Yeah, okay.
Oh, yes.
Well, I didn't go to school at Brett. I went to school at Davisville and then went over to
Right.
in the 7th grade. So I knew who he was, though, because
Right.
I knew a lot
Well,
of the Brett.
Mr. Bob was always around the school, and if we had bus duty or in the mornings or afternoons or any time, and it just so happened that Mr. Copeland was not around or Mr. McKay was not there at the time, and they were giving us trouble, all we needed to do was to call Mr. Bob, and he could come out, and he'd just tell them that he was going to tell their mama or something.
How about that?
And
Now, you started teaching your teaching career in Atmore, and then you went to Brett?
I started teaching at Brett.
You started teaching at Brett.
I taught at Brett for 3 years, and then there was one PE class that I had not had, and I was in the midst of getting that one, finishing that one up, and I was going to. I think they were offering it at the Naval Air Station. There were a group of us from Alabama that did not have that Florida required. And then after I got that, I think I got. I had some surgery. So then when I got over that, I just started in teaching in Atmore then, because they had needed 2nd grade teachers at Rachel Patterson. So I taught 4 years at the Rachel Patterson, and then, of course, the A.C. Moore School, they had opened up then, and their 4th grade teacher left, and they transferred me to the A.C. Moore School at that time. So I came over to A.C. Moore and taught 4 years. And Mr. Butler was the principal, and he knew I really wanted to get back in Florida, you see, so he came to me one day and said, they have passed a bill that if you go that they are going to stop letting you use your Alabama years towards your retirement in Florida. And they're going to do that next year. And he said, I know if you want to go back, it might be a good time to do it. So they had a vacancy, and I went back to Brett. I started at Brett in the 5th grade, and about that time was when the Korean War started. See, when I graduated from college, and my husband, not at that time, but my boyfriend, when we were that was we dated all during our high school years, and then I went to Montevallo, and he went to junior college in Mississippi on football scholarship, and then we just for 4 years we were apart and didn't get together, and we each one dated other people, and then when I graduated. He was already back in Atmore when I graduated from Montevallo. Then we got together again and knew what we wanted at that time. And
who was your husband?
Kenneth Cunningham.
Kenneth Cunningham. Was he an Atmore?
No, he was from Tennessee. His dad had moved here during World War II, you see. But anyway, that was how I got back to. And then as soon as I started teaching. Then the Korean War, and he was in the National Guard, and the Atmore National Guard unit was activated. And so then the next spring we married, and I still came back in the summer, and I started back teaching at Brad. And then he was transferred into Michigan, and so to Battle Creek in Michigan, and so he wanted me. By that time, he had gotten a promotion, and he could afford to pay rent, and so
you could afford a wife now.
Yeah, so we went up. I followed him there, and I left at Thanksgiving of that year, and so I still get letters and notes from some of the kids that I left in the middle, and they said, "We're still mad at you because you left." But then then when I came back, I went back to. No, that was when. Oh, wait a minute. When I came back, I guess that's when I went back to Atmore. I can't remember that. I can't remember the exact year, but anyway, I do know that.
But now your tenure, your time, you mentioned a little bit about this earlier, that you didn't lose your time going back to Florida, but what about when you came to Alabama the first time? Did you have to give up the 3 or 4 years that you had taught at Brad? Or
no, I think those years were still on record. No, I'm not. Yeah, they were on record too. They were still on record.
So you could move from Alabama to Florida
I moved back and forth, you see. But Florida was going to stop that. They were going to stop that. Right. If I had not gone back to Florida at that time, they would have stopped it before I could claim those years, you see. And then I actually taught substituted teaching at a school in Battle Creek, Michigan, but and they were really short of teachers also, so it was a big 3-story elementary building, and I taught just about every day for some teacher, So that was an interesting experience too. So
now, you taught what grades? You started off with 5th grade.
I started off in the 5th.
5th. And then later, what was your specialty? Middle school?
English, and middle school English.
Middle school English.
See, Bright got where they transferred the 9th grade over to Ernest Ward.
Right, in the 9th grade.
And when they did that, the English teacher at that time in the middle school wanted to go back to her specialty, which was kindergarten, and Florida had just brought in kindergarten, you see. So that left them without an English teacher. And I said, I don't want to teach that age. I will not touch that age. Well, they kept after me until I did it. So then I had 1 year left, and I decided that I was just going to teach 1 more year, and I was going to retire. And then, of course, the principal at Ernest Ward retired, and they were asking. And the English teacher in the middle school retired, and they needed an English teacher there, and they wanted me to come over there, and I really didn't know what to do. But finally, I thought, well, I'm just going to teach 1 more year. But I remember Kenneth, my husband, saying, you might enjoy going to another school, you know. So I did. I did transfer it, and I told him, I said, now I'm just staying 1 year. And I retired 8 years later. I stayed 8 years when I got there.
Now, you said the principal retired. Was that Mr. Kaiser?
Mr. Kaiser had, who came? I can't remember. Trying to think of who it was. Mr. Kaiser had retired by then. He was the assistant principal at that time, and they brought. And then of course, Mr. Copeland retired.
Mm-hmm.
And but I love both schools. I loved them, both those schools. Of course, I just loved all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I love all of them.
You, when'd you retire?
When did I retire? 1989.
89. Okay.
I have. I'm one of those fortunate people that have had 33 years of retirement.
3 years of retirement. Now you knew a lot of the other teachers, and I want to see if I can goad you a little bit into commenting about some of the other legends down there.
Okay.
Now Mr. Copeland obviously was a legend.
Right, he was.
Was principal over there at Bradford.
Right.
He taught my
Yeah.
children. He taught my first wife.
Right.
Had one arm. I don't know how he lost that arm. It seemed like a railroad accident or something. I never heard the story, and his wife, Miss Addie Bell, we used to call her ABC,
Right.
Addie Bell Copeland. She taught at Davisville
Right.
through those years.
And then, of course, and then Mr. Fayard was down. He was one of the ones. They all came from Mississippi over here to teach.
They did, didn't they?
Right. They all.
They
came
come for
from
the money. I know.
No.
No?
Well,
Was
it could have been. They may have been. Florida at that time was paying
A little bit more.
Oh, listen, they were paying much more than Alabama. That's why I would go to Florida. See?
Okay.
But now it's vice versa.
Yeah.
Now I think Alabama pays more than Florida.
A lot of those teachers, it seems like to me, back when I was in school, came from Mississippi. Mister Horton, the McKays,
Right,
came
the
from
McKays
Mississippi,
and the
and
yeah.
quite a few of them.
right.
But they, who were you closest to as far as the other teachers?
Well, Mr. Hoffman, I guess, would be
Ron Hoffman.
right.
Okay.
I think Mr. Hoffman was probably my closest down there, and Doris Van Pelt.
Okay.
Doris and I we taught next door. She taught science, and I taught English. You see, so we were next door, and Mr. Hoffman was just up the from us.
Remember right where he was? Yeah.
I remember over at Bratt, if I ever had trouble in the classroom, if one of those kids, he heard them say the doors would be open because we didn't have air conditioning at that time, some of that time, and we would have our windows open, and if he ever heard one of those boys raise their voice at me when I said something to him, he would walk out into the hall and just bang his paddle on the wall by my room, and their mouths would close just as fast as they'd open.
That was Mr. Copeland?
No, Mr. Hoffman.
Mr. Hoffman.
Oh, they were scared to death, Mr. Hoffman. So,
he taught my children, and my oldest daughter Laura. She made straight A's under him.
oh, I know it. Listen, she just, she was so
I asked
good.
her why she said, well, I was scared. Said because if you didn't do your work, he'd whip you with that paddle. She said he made me. Mr. Hoffman made me do good. Scared not to.
And I was so, they moved to, he retired, and he developed Alzheimer's, and he moved to, they finally moved to Spanish Fort, where their son lived, so that.
His name was Ron, too, I believe.
But anyway, and then, of course, Gene Webb.
Gene Webb, yeah.
Gene,
passed just recently.
But Gene and I were friends long, long before we moved here. I mean, when I first moved to Atmore, my mother and her mother knew each other. And I was starting 7th grade, and Gene was finishing high school that year. And, of course, then, but she taught me to drive a car. That was way before you got your license.
Really? How about that?
She taught me how to drive the car so that that if I ever needed to, I could, So she taught me how to drive, and we became friends. And her mother made almost all my clothes, and so then, of course, then she married during the war. and they were then when they came home. They went back to college, and but anyway, we were really good friends. And so then when we used to go to teach, she taught high school English, and we used to go to English classes in Pensacola meetings that we had to go to. We would ride down there, and ride together, and always enjoyed that. And then finally, then when I went over to Ernest Ward, she was still there. See, in fact, I guess I retired before she did. And but anyway, she
She was assistant principal over there
yeah,
for a
right.
period of time. Yeah.
But I think when I first got there, I think that she was not quite sure that I knew what to do or not, that I was doing it the right way, you know, and I did. But we pretty soon got it. I think she finally realized I had grown up. I said, you know, it's hard to accept people you've known as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but finally I think she realized, well, maybe she doesn't know what she's doing. And so it was really nice too. And then if she had to go to a meeting, I would take her English class for that day. You know, I'd just sit in with them if it was my free period, you know. But anyway, we were very, very good friends, of course. But I loved Brett. Of course, I loved my teaching in Atmore. I loved all those kids, and I loved teaching at Brett, and I loved teaching at Ernest Ward.
Mm-hmm.
I just loved all of them. I have been one of those fortunate people that did exactly what they wanted to do and enjoyed doing it.
Well, that's the way to do it, isn't
Right.
it?
Now, I'm not saying that some days I didn't come home and just literally pull my hair out and say, why did I want to do this, you know? But I just loved those children. It didn't matter to me whether they were rich, poor, or whether they were slow learners or quick learners, because I just loved them.
Did you have a preference, boys and girls?
Well, I think that boys are probably the easiest to teach.
Really?
I think they're easier. Now, in the elementary school, I don't think so. I don't think there's much difference in the elementary school. But when you get in the middle school, the girls are in a growing up period, and the boys are slower growing up than girls. And so sometimes I spent a lot of my time out in the hall with a group of girls, or taking them down to the auditorium and sitting down and talking to them about, because somebody had looked at their boyfriend, you know, and
boy.
They were in tears and they were crying and carrying on. And
More drama with girls.
And then they were fussing and, you know, about that. So I think at that time the girls might have been a little harder to manage, but I still loved them.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about your own children? How many children did you have?
I had 2 boys.
2 boys.
2 boys.
So you didn't have any girl experience with your own.
I wish I had a little girl, but I just had two boys, and they grew up as boys do, brothers, fussing and fighting, and you'd think they just hated each other, you know, when they were together. And then they both, a guy went off to college. And of course, as soon as a new hit song came on the radio, he would call Glenn to see if he had heard it, and Glenn would hear one, and he'd call. And his daddy said, now listen, when you all were home, you would not give each other the time of the day. And he said, now when it's, well, I have to pay for you all to talk to each other. He said, you got to cut this out a little. And then, so I don't know which would be. I just loved all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the girls in elementary school are not as hard, but when you get in the middle school, they're a little bit. It's not harder. It's just that they have. They're more interested in other things, you know, when they get so. They're into more boyfriends.
Uh-huh. Were boys more ruffian-like in those days than they are now? I know boys have changed. You know, a lot of boys back in those days were taking over family duties, dropping out of school
Yes,
at 13, 14 years old.
Right.
Do you think the boys, I'm speaking of boys, but I guess
Right.
girls too, do you think they matured better or earlier in those days than now? I mean, I look at some of my grandchildren that are 16 and 17, and they aren't doing the stuff that I used to do when I was.
Well, you know that times changed, because then when they began to cut things out of the curriculum, you know, that we could not teach, and when we got a little bit more, I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that, because, of course, back when I taught, the system was so different from the way it is now that it's hard for me to even compare the two, because things back then could be settled more. Now, I remember when I went to Bratt, I didn't have as, you would have your usual trouble, you know, but I didn't have what I would call something that couldn't be handled, you know. Most of the time, the parents were right behind you.
Mm-hmm. That's a big deal, isn't it?
Right.
Because it's just almost the opposite
right.
now.
Right, that's right. And now the teachers are afraid that to do this, some of them, because the parents have so much authority to come back on them, you see. And back then, most of the time when I was teaching and first started, the teachers were, that was what, and you didn't, of course you had parents that didn't like what you were doing, but you could sit down and talk to them. And but I will have to say that most of the parents that I taught backed me up in most things.
I do think that's a big deal.
I do think there
that
has
makes
been.
all the difference.
I know there's been a big change, and I saw that change coming. I really saw that change coming when I retired. And you see, I retired in '89, and from the 60s until I retired in '89 were the hardest years that I taught, because my hands were tied on a lot of things. And it was so much, we've taken over with so many things that they wanted us to do that were not actually teaching. See, when I first started teaching, you were in control of your classroom. And if you didn't finish something this 6 weeks, well, you took it up the next 6 weeks. But then it got to where there were certain things you had to teach within 6 weeks, you see. And that's what drove me out. The control that was the government was bringing in with so much control then. I said, you know, I'm tired of this. I've been in here now 33 years. I'm tired. I mean, 38 years, and I'm tired.
Do you think the kids got a better education in those days than they're getting now, or do you have an opinion on that?
Well, it's hard. That's another hard question, because of the things that back then things were so simple, and you did most of your math and things like that you did with your head. I mean, you actually did that. You worked it out.
You didn't have a calculator.
Now you've got all this. You've got your computers, you've got your calculators, you've got all those things that you can look those things up. Back then, if you did not know the answer to something, you had to read it to find out. And now you've got all this other information that's coming. To me, I think it's a very trying time for children in school because they are not allowed to be children.
Mm-hmm.
I think they should have more free time. I think they should be allowed to grow up a little bit slower than they are doing now. But you see, I have been out of the system so long that it's hard for me to say.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that too much control, the teachers don't have as much authority in their classroom anymore. And I know I have know of one girl that has had in my church at home that has had a very hard time teaching this year, and she has been so discouraged, and she would put people on Facebook and about what was happening, and I've tried to send back and give her a few words of wisdom, that I had,
Mm-hmm.
to tell her that those things would probably work out, but she had been in a bad teaching situation, and I was just fortunate that I taught where you had the backing of the parents, and that is to me, that's one of the most essential things, that the parents will back the teachers. But then the teachers now feel as if they don't have anybody to back them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's changed. It's changed a lot.
Well, that was a special time, I'm sure.
It was.
To be able to participate in the education system like you did for all those years.
It was the best time I had. I think I had well, as I've said before, I've been really fortunate because I taught in the good days. I talk to
a lot of teachers nowadays who are absolutely miserable.
Oh, I know.
With what they're having to contend
Uh-huh.
with. They feel, one of the things in psychology about people as people get older is when people lose their autonomy, their ability to govern their own lives, making
That's
decisions
right.
and so forth. And same way with a professional like a teacher, when you don't have the autonomy to do things your own way, that got to be frustrating.
That's right. It can be.
Well, you were certainly one of the legends.
I feel for the teachers so much today because of the fact that they don't have it. Like we had, if you had a really good principal in your school, that was just about all you needed. And then also, you did not have this. You weren't always trying to change everything with all the curriculum. I mean, there were certain things you could teach. And I remember the last year I taught, we had just gone, the English department, we had just gone through rewriting the English curriculum for the middle school. And I had been going to Pensacola one day a week for I've forgotten how many weeks. And I don't know whether Mrs. Webb, they were rewriting the high school curriculum or not at that same time, but we used to stay with each other's classes when we had to be out. But one day a week I was away. So the very next year, the year I retired, Mr. Pettis, the principal of the school then, came down.
Gene Pettis, I remember him.
Gene Pettis, and he was one of the best principals that you would ever hope to have. And he came down and he said, the last 6 weeks of school, he said, you will have to go down to Pensacola again for one Thursday a week. And said, we already have a substitute for you. I said, why? I asked why, and he said, because they've just called and said the English, the chairman of the English department had called and said they were rewriting the English curriculum. I said, well, we just rewrote it last year. And they said, well, they're going to do it again. And I said, well, let them get somebody else. That's my last 6 weeks to me. And he said, no, they said that you were to come. And so he said, the superintendent said for you to come. And so, of course, I went. And so one day they changed that. So I never really knew how they changed it because I was out by then and I didn't go back and get a copy of it. But anyway, those were the times changed and it was time for me to get out and I knew it. And then, but I hated to leave and I hated to leave all those students, you know.
Have you missed it since you've retired? I know you stay busy because we've had a hard time scheduling our interviews, so I know you have a busy life.
I've missed being with the children, but I have not missed all. I retired when it was just too much going on, and I just did not go along with all of it, and I said, I'm not I just don't want to be a part of it anymore.
Now, we've only got 3 or 4 minutes, so I told you we'd run out of time. But what do you do with now, do you mind if I tell them how old you are?
Oh, I'll be.
Are you proud of that?
Yes, I am.
Miss Cunningham is 93, correct?
I am.
She is 93, and I'm looking at her right here. She certainly doesn't look it, and you can tell from her conversation that she doesn't act it either. She's beautiful lady.
I stay busy. I volunteer with the Daphne Museum. I volunteer with that. I volunteer with my church. I have a really, really good group of friends that we do things together, and we watch football games together. And I will have to say now, and some of my students, if they hear this, they're going to be hollering, oh, no, she's not. We all say War Eagle. And so I'm sure some of the students are saying, oh, she's so. But anyway, we get together, we watch the games, and we do. So I really do. I stay busy. I don't have many days that I don't have something that I do. My neighbors laugh all the time because they say that they won't all guess when Miss Cunningham's car is going out again, you know.
What's the secret? What's the secret to growing old gracefully?
Not thinking about age. Age has never mattered to me.
Just don't think about it.
Age is just a number to me. Age is not. I've never thought about age. I've never worried about it. I know I'm thankful. It's wonderful to me that I have lived to be 93, and I forget it at times. I completely forget that now I have lived. I am even the oldest member of our church now, you know, so they tease me about that, about Mama Lucy and all this, but that's what, don't think about age. Age is just a number.
Do you think attitude has a lot to do with aging?
Oh, I think attitude, that's what I'm trying to say, the attitude that you take about some people. I've had friends that say they start at 70 years. I'm so old. And some lady was telling me the other day, she said, you know, as you get as old as I am, you just can't do those things you do. And I said, then she admitted her age. She says, you know, I'm 80 years old now. And I said, well, I have a few years on you. And she said, well, how old are you? And I said, 93. And she says, well, how do you do it? I said, I just wake up every morning and go.
Well, sometimes I joke about getting older, that I may be getting old, but I'm very immature for whatever that's worth.
Well, that's probably what I am. But I thank God every day for the life He's given me, because I have been one of those. I guess I feel as if I've been one of the most blessed people that's ever been on earth. That's what I feel.
That's wonderful. We're out of time, and I knew this time would come. I wish but maybe we'll do another follow-up when you're 103. We'll do another. Miss Lucy Cunningham, she's quite a legend. She's been around a long time, and I hope you've enjoyed her today. I know I have. Lucy, go forth and continue to enjoy life. It was wonderful to see you and
I appreciate
have you on the
this.
program.
And hope my students all hear this, because in terms of that, I still love every one of you.
Thanks for listening to the Lloyd and Friends Show with Lloyd Overton.